Reading a transcript?
Um, I'm not sure.
Okay, that's fine. We can figure that out. That's okay. Yeah, so I'm just going to proceed with introducing you to the class. And
Should I
then,
put up should I share my screen or
sure, up to you.
I
Like
have
they
my
can see
intro
it.
slide.
Yeah. Or we can go ahead. I can do it too. Yeah.
Good morning, everyone. Sorry I couldn't join you for the first class. We had a time presentation for the campus design and projects that I'm working on with architecture and the Dean's office in Ghana, near Accra. It went well, and I am now excited to introduce our last speaker for the AI lecture series. We have Chris Landau and Ishan joining us. Uh, I'm going to introduce them both, and then also talk about what they're going to say. Chris will join us and share some of his adventures and insights using AI. After 11 years at OLIN as visualizer and manager of design technology, Chris founded LANDAU Design+Technology in 2019 and works on a wide range of technology, design, engagement, and storytelling projects. He also developed LandKit, a plugin for Rhino and Grasshopper, which accelerates landscape design, allowing for iteration, analysis, and evaluation. Today's lecture is titled Building Landscape Tools with AI Support. When it comes to tool making, AI is a better coder than us. But tool development requires more than just code. It requires the human ability to identify problems, usage patterns, and the ever elusive usability question. Given these skill sets, how can we as designers capitalize on AI? How does one start? What opportunities exist to maximize it?
Wonderful. Yeah. Ishan, I don't know if I have your bio down here. You want to introduce yourself?
I'll quickly introduce myself because Chris will be giving the presentation. I've been working with Chris for a little bit over a year, but I graduated from Penn and I've worked at a couple of companies in New York, MBVA, Scape, local office, and I'm now freelancing and working with Chris on disseminating LandKit, which he'll talk more about. Thank you for having us.
Amazing.
Thank you for joining us, Ishan and Chris.
Great. Take it away.
Yeah, and it's really great to have it. Sean he made this connection for this lecture and is really had a lot of great insights into what we're doing, and we're excited. We're going to be starting a video series here soon, Ishan and I,
Ooh,
which should be fun.
that's fun.
Yeah. So, hi, I'm Chris Landau, and I'm the founder of Landau Design and Technology, which has been around for about 7.5 years or so, and LandKit, which has been around for about 6 years or so. LandKit being a plugin for Grasshopper and Rhino for landscape. And Landau is really, um, I'm going to talk a little bit more about our mission, which is sort of to accelerate landscape architecture and to elevate it. But let me just start with a little bit of history, just very brief amount of history. This is Laurie Olin, if anyone doesn't know, and he's kind of a really a icon and legend of landscape architecture now these days in American landscape architecture. And I ran into him in Cincinnati at CELA, a conference for educators in landscape architecture, and we decided to have lunch. And so we got to visit one of his projects, and we got talking about projects that we were working on together when I was there for about 11 years. And the big one for me was the Apple campus in Cupertino, California. And I was saying to Lori that it's like the crown jewel in his portfolio, and I was really excited to be able to work on it. And he had all kinds of great things to say about how they're seeing all this biodiversity on the site. There's just great stuff. It's such a success story. One of my contributions was being able to model the all of the 3D benches on the site, the stone benches All the benches on the site are actually 3D. I don't know if you knew that. Um, so, and they look simple, but they're more, in Apple fashion, they're more complicated than they look. They're very tightly modeled. So that, among other things on the Apple project, prompted a lot of questions in terms of how the firm and me as a designer, how we approach design. And one of the big things that I was always using was parametric design. And we used parametric design on the benches, and we used parametric design on all of these different research projects and on large. This is actually a green roof project over here that was 30-acre green roof design, and we were using agents to sort of figure out where, program wanted to go on a site. We were using agents to figure out where plants wanted to go. And this was actually an example from the Apple campus, one of these typical planting condition diagrams that they were creating for the construction. But all of these, we kind of pulled them under the umbrella of OLIN Labs, and I was there to help create OLIN Labs, before I left, and I was kind of the head of the tech lab. Um, and we were focused on building tools for all these different aspects of landscape architecture in the firm and things that the other labs were doing. And I really liked that. And I brought that spirit with me when I started my own business, LANDAU Design and Technology. And the mission for LANDAU the main mission is to empower landscape architects by accelerating their impact. And that we do that through technology, but we also do that through storytelling and some of the services that we provide, the consulting that we provide. So there's a number of problems that we're trying to solve typically with landscape architecture, and just, problems that landscape architects are trying to solve, which is that there's a lot of complexity, a lot of complicated narratives, and many problems to solve, and such little time and budget. This problem set just continues to grow and grow, right? So it started with kind of adding the idea of sustainability and thinking about accessibility, and it's we're adding in these technologies like AI and parametric design and BIM, and now we're solving things like carbon calculation and biodiversity and equity and engagement. All these things are, when I make this list, it sort of sounds like I'm saying we're doing too much. And in a way we are, but I think we should be doing all these things. It's just that the amount of time and budget that we have is not matched to what we're trying to do. And some of these things like BIM make it even harder. Like Revit, it's trying to model things in Revit is even more of a one-way street in terms of like the difficulty of actually designing. Because once it's in there, it's like really hard to change. So it's really hard to take feedback. It's really hard to do all these things. And so a lot of people, I think, are sort of love the idea of AI, right? Because AI can accelerate a lot of these things. And but one of the problems is that in using AI for generating images, and having design be this image-based thing, we're not really fulfilling the ability to create models and documentation, like CAD documentation. It's not there yet. There are certain things that we can do, and so we have, even before AI came along, we've been really focused on how computational and parametric design can become, one, more accessible to more people, more designers, more of the profession, more, to students, but also how it can accelerate landscape design even faster. And that's why we created LandKit. And LandKit, it's all of these different landscape functions that you can use to build basically like design programs, like little design workflows. We also have workflows that we've shared and that we continue to work on that are really easy to use, that someone else doesn't have to actually build, for the main areas of topography, paving, uh, planting, and analysis, but also for soil cells for placing, for growing trees in cities. So the one main thing I'd like to talk about today, use as a main example, is planting. And LandKit allows you to do rules-based planting. This is an example of a project we worked on after I started Landau, and we were collaborating with OLIN down in Alabama. And the idea was that we wanted to use native plants, and we had sunshade conditions, we had different soil moisture conditions, and we wanted a nice mix so that to create, having mixes of plants that are different is great for biodiversity. So everywhere where you have differences, it can actually support biodiversity, not just diverse species. And we used rules to place these plants. So we created shapes for the different colors of bloom. We created shapes for where we wanted shrubs versus other kinds of plants, where we wanted clonal plants. Like I said, soil moisture, sunshade, and all of these plants were based and placed off of those rules and not by hand, right? So we're not drawing, placing all these little individual blocks. The neat thing about that is you can change anything about that system and it updates and the design updates. You could even change the palette of plants. And the palette in this case was from a database that we got from some scientists we were working with. So it was very involved plant database. Not everybody has that at their disposal. And we realized that. So students and young designers and sometimes small firms, they're just trying to figure something out. Like just start with something as a design. So these days, we might go to AI and say, hey, I want a bunch of plants, a short list of plants that form a guild that can be used reasonably for a public park, but that also support biodiversity. Think about companion plantings and nutrients so we don't have to use fertilizers. Pretty complex question that you're asking, but AI is usually up to the task of delivering something to answer those questions. So you can throw all these crazy curveballs at AI, and that's one thing I really like with developing a plant list. And I have it using the thinking tool here. It's actually really thinking very hard, harder than usual. This is Gemini, but it gave us a list and it explains why and that some of these things fix nitrogen and that helps the other plants. And there's actually a symbiosis there happening. Um, and so you can ask these hard questions that typically we'd be like, oh, well, like you just have to talk to a plant expert. In this case, we can get further. It doesn't necessarily replace a plant expert, but we can get further. And um, and was the answer that it gives us. The only thing about this answer is that it's just a list of plants. What are we going to do with this now? Well, we're going to take this and probably use a more traditional design approach, right? You've got to go and assign blocks to plants. You've got to go and figure out how big those plants are, what they look like, all these things, and it's a lot to figure out if you don't know what they are or if you don't have those resources. And then you're probably placing them manually, or if you're doing LandKit, you're having to create a database. So that's a lot. That's a huge barrier. And what we did is we created a tool within LandKit that allows you, and it's just a little widget, and we use a little bit of AI to help us write the code for this. But it basically asks, you give it a prompt, and these are the prompts you can see above here. They're all different, and each one is generating a different list of plants. Those plants aren't delivered as a list of text. They're delivered um, as a set of plant data that then we can use to to do the rules-based planting and place those plants. So we're going from an idea of what kind of plants we want and having those rules set up to an actual a CAD drawing, right? These are blocks that are in the file. Thanks, Ishan. These are good annotations. Um, and the neat thing is that we have that iteration process, and that's the whole idea behind LandKit is that we're iterating fast. Like we can take design ideas and set it up in such a way that we can make fundamental changes to the design, and it changes over a quick period of time, so that we can design, we can get feedback on design from folks we're working with, the community, whatever the case may be, and it empowers landscape to be faster. So a great example of using this tool and using AI in general was a workshop I did at the University of Virginia for coastal resiliency. That the whole studio was based on an area of the Chesapeake Bay, and I wanted to create an example that kind of provided an idea to the students of something and how we could use the tools. And it wasn't necessarily a prescriptive assignment, but it was a way for me to explore. And I came up with this idea of coastal glamping. So you create this kind of like spine of little roads that are on mounds that are built up. We even had narratives like, where does that soil come from? And the idea was that the soil comes from these secondary ditches that we would dig. There's a lot of ditches in this area because of the flooding. And so we were thinking about these secondary ditches, which I was calling sponge ditches, where you could plant, uh, you know, uh, plants, whether those were food forests or just kind of bioremediation ditches. But the idea was that they weren't interfering with the usual drainage ditches. Because originally I thought, why are they just have lawn in these drainage ditches? And then it rained when I was there, and it was crazy. I was so scared for my life. There was so much water. It was insane. It flooded. But anyways, so this idea that you could create these kind of coastal ecologies, and then we can ask AI like we did before for, things like, make sure that it's okay in saline soil. Make sure that it's going to be great in this region. Make sure that, you include some plants that actually are productive. So I've started getting a strong interest in food forests and how can these kinds of wild planting installations have food resilience, which creates great food for animals, but also for people or campers or maybe even the community who wants to do that. Because it's glamping, it could be an economic source. But the idea was that we could quickly make parametric changes, but also make plant changes. And this is actually more of a parametric change that you're seeing here, where we could adjust the amounts of plants or planting typologies to meet some sort of pro forma that the community had about what they want to do economically, et cetera. So it's really flexible, and you could see how this kind of idea could scale up really quickly, right? So it's a strategy that could be used in hundreds of communities, possibly, right? Like coastal communities that are facing coastal issues. There's all kinds of solutions. This is probably, I don't know, a fancy wild solution, but yeah. So another workshop we did was this cool playgrounds workshop in Nebraska. And the reason this is interesting for AI is that I used AI to help develop the tool. So I started asking AI about, calculating heat in the landscape, and we went back and forth about what would be the right thing, and eventually we came up with this idea of ground heat flux, and which focuses mainly on the amount of sun exposure, like the number of hours of sun, and then what is the emissivity and the albedo of the surface, right? And so you only need these two values for each type of zone. And then you're depending on your region, you're adjusting your solar radiation and a few things. But it's other than that, it's very simple, right? It's like really a very simple thing to do. And we're already analyzing the sunshade for plants, and we're just using that same analysis. Well, when I got to Nebraska, it was very cold. And it was like the coldest place I think I had ever been before. And they were like, this is crazy because it wasn't this cold last week. So it was pretty funny. But because of that, we looked at the summer exposure and the winter exposure. But in the summer case, we're calculating the amount of heat, and it was great because you can see, oh, hey, don't put the slide here. And it was a great example of how to see how interactively the other changes you're making about placing trees or canopies, how those are affected in summer and winter. But AI helped me kind of do a little bit of research, to look up some things and make sure that the formulas that it was creating for me were the right formulas. And I really went back and forth with AI, and it was like a collaborator trying to develop this tool. So that's like, but I was copying all the code in and I was doing all this stuff and I was kind of doing a little bit of research and stuff. Um, and oh, you can see how in the summer or in the winter you get a lot of solar radiation that's exposed because the trees don't have leaves anymore. So trees are a really great way to regulate heat in the landscape. So the last example I wanted to talk about is this is a interactive map that a community, we're working on this Herndon project with agency. It's a comprehensive plan that Herndon's this community near the Dulles Airport. And we've done these maps in the past, but the idea is you create a beautiful custom map and you're able to put pins and leave comments and apply categories to these things and have a comment. Anybody in the community can leave a comment, they can see other comments, they can do replies, and it's really a conversation. It's a conversational map. But we've never had languages translating the map like this before. So we just used a simple Google Translate widget, and so they can pick the common languages in the town of Herndon. They can choose from that and leave their comment, and then other people will be able to translate and see what they said. And so it's a multilingual conversation as well as a community-wide conversation, which is very exciting. Um, this is the first time that I created this map without a programmer. I used AI. We took previous code example of a different map that we had done, and we started to adapt that map. We still had to create the icons ourselves custom for this particular map. We created, a custom map styling and map box. And we had some different ways of approaching things than we did before. But to do all of that, to make all those changes and to deploy the map and do things that I would normally rely on a coder for, I used GitHub Copilot. And the GitHub Copilot's pretty interesting. It uses agentic coding. How many people have ever heard of agentic coding? I can see you guys, so raise your hands or not, according to agentic. There we go. We got someone. So agentic coding allows you to ask a question, and rather than ChatGPT just giving you an answer, it actually goes over here and it adds files and it like changes files and it does stuff like run code on your computer and stuff. So it's a little scary, right? Like you're doing these things, but it's built to be cautious and ask questions about like, can I have your permission to run this code, to do this thing, whatever. But the neat thing is you're going back and forth with agentic AI to do things. With Copilot, you can pick between Claude and Chat and Gemini and these different models, and it will use those to help you work on your project. Depending on the task, you may pick different things. So that's kind of great. It's sort of um, language agnostic in terms of the tool. But the cool thing is that was really neat to me is that I was able to go in and artistically make these decisions. Not only am I saying, technologically make sure it's deployed on a server and that it's doing these things, but I could say, add a little bit of spacing to this thing here, or change the language, or make sure you adjust the color palette of this thing or that thing, or so it was a way of actually being more involved in the process than I was in the past. Because when I had a programmer that I was working with, I had a set budget for the programmer. We had to get it all done within a certain time frame. I had to prepare all of my thoughts in advance so that I'm communicating all those things to the person. They're doing the thing. They're not a designer. So the decisions they're making that I haven't specified are probably not going to be what I would do, you know. And then we have this back and forth that is more a longer process, right? And so what I like about agentic AI is similar to what I liked about LandKit is that it's this faster feedback loop, but for building a tool and actually, creating something that's unique to a project, etc. Now, there are limitations to working this way, right? I don't know why my hand is still up. Can it go away? Lower hand. Yes, there we go. Um, I've done this. I've worked on this map before. Even though I worked with developers, I was in the code and I understood everything that was happening because I was responsible for the thing, sort of maintaining that moving forward, and it was important. So I when I did this, I was kind of moving a little bit outside of my realm of knowledge, but not way outside. And I think that's the key if you're going to use these tools and build things is to sort of get started small with, in terms of small, I just mean small steps beyond what you know how to do, right? So asking it to sort of do something that you're familiar with, that's one thing. And then sort of starting to kind of have it help you move beyond that is the other thing. The cool thing is you can also ask AI to explain things to you, right? You can say, hey, like, I'm always constantly asking AI to make really good README documents, to do really good sort of documentation, um, stuff that normally would be like, oh my gosh, like we have to add testing to this, or we have to add this error handling or whatever, that would take another however many days or whatever to do. And you can ask it to do this. It builds it not instantaneously. It's not instantaneous. You don't just push a button. I've spent hours and hours on this map, right? But I'm more involved personally in developing it and making decisions and iterating and making sure that the map is really cool for the community to use. So not only can you use AI for, just asking questions, developing simple code that you can use in sort of Grasshopper or like little scripts, um, but you can also use it to help you develop real tools or customized tools, and not just for 3D and CAD. This is also great because it works really well for community engagement, you know. And I think I think designers should begin to do these things a little bit more, but I think similar to the way we've been working in the past, it does help to have folks who really focus on these things. So you might be one of those people, or you might be working with one of those people. And understanding kind of how this process works is going to help you. Because if you're the person who's always like, I don't know like anything about what you do, but can you help us with this thing? Right? Like it's good to know a little bit about what other people are doing. As the generalist in the room, which landscape architects are, it's important to know things, and AI can help with that too. So, anyways, I'm open to questions. We're probably a little beyond what we were supposed to do originally, but I think we got started late. I might just go back to this planting thing here.
Yeah, that's great. Thanks so much, Chris. That was such a fun lecture to listen to. Does anyone have any questions? Students?
Are you guys using AI in your class, or are the students using it?
Yeah, so they've been using, this is a design communications 2 course, which is they are, the student body consists of sophomores and pre-MLA students. And they've just begun their journey with digital tools and 3D modeling, and they have been using AI. Does anyone want to discuss how you use it? Do you want to come forward?
Got a question.
Okay, why don't you come to the podium?
Hi.
Hey, how's it going?
Good.
My name's Lisa. I'm a bachelor student here. I'm curious, if you had to go back and do your schooling over again, how would you be implementing some of these basic AI tools? And what do you think would be like appropriate in your like learning journey? Because like a
Yeah.
lot of us are, you know, a lot of folks are more familiar with using computer assisted tools. Some people are, definitely wanting to stay with more hand drawn stuff. So, it's a real big spectrum here of
Yeah.
we're, implementing AI and the rules around using AI ethically. So what do you think you would do if you had to go back and do it again?
The thing that's really hard, I would do exactly what I did, which was experiment constantly. I didn't go to landscape architecture school. I went to art school, but I was doing all kinds of crazy stuff. I was trying different media. I was like combining different things. My MFA thesis was combined printmaking, flash, audio, like all these crazy things, right? This environmental narrative. But I would say that I would learn as much as you can and experiment, but also it's also about developing the critical thinking about, am I making something that is meaningful and that is a useful tool set or useful workflow. Um, and that's the hard thing. And it's hard when you get into a firm to have that latitude to experiment. And it's, if I had to give advice to people versus firms, I would say, to the people, like keep experimenting and keep trying things. But it's that also that rule of like not going too far outside. If you go a little bit outside and you keep taking those risks, you begin to develop quite a range of what you can do. And I would encourage the firms to also allow and professors to allow students to kind of, do that. There's obviously the core skills to learn, but I think, you know, when we begin to add more and more to the mix, you're not going to use everything, right? And different people you're going to use different amounts of these things in different ways. So you might use hand drawing and AI in a certain way, or you might, find a way of like maybe you're horrible at hand drawing and you're just like right into the computer and you've got ways of doing that in a really fluid, cool way. So I think it actually opens up the range of possibility for accessing technology. I also think drawing is a technology. So, it's a way of communicating and getting our ideas out. One of the things I'm always saying is that computational design, because it's faster and allows us to iterate faster, it opens up the possibility to do more drawing and like come up with more ideas and be more in that vein. Also, if you wanted to do hand drawing after the fact, like that's also totally a possibility, right? Like we did a lot of stuff at OLIN where we would build a model and then rather than rendering it, we would sketch over it, right? We'd trace over that. And I did drawings for Lori of the US Embassy um, in London, of these interiors where I modeled it and then I sat down and I drew it out, so I think having those multiple skills is really good, and just like I said, just keep experimenting and applying those different skills in different ways, and school's a really good place to do that.
And I would just compliment, I think it's a great question. The ethical question in academia of like what is generated by you versus AI, I think is a
Yeah.
really complicated one. But I I will just harp on what Chris was saying. I think it was a really beautiful close to the presentation about the generalist, the one in the room that can speak to the civil engineer, to the architect. I, for example, come to landscape architecture from architecture. I did an undergrad in architecture, got my master's in landscape because I'm a New Yorker. I was inspired by Sandy, the High Line. But then I worked at MVVA, I worked at Scape, I worked at SWA, I had short internships at W Architecture, and all these different, like, touching on these different ways of working has made me a generalist because I speak as a designer, and having a wide range of how to do things and different approaches makes you go back and say this could be done faster or this could be done the other way. I compliment, I think, Chris really well because having worked at many of these firms, I'm always like I have a go-to way of like sketching something, drawing it in CAD, and then modeling it, and that's my process. But LandKit, I'm like, I want to plug this in because I know that it exists and there's a faster way. So becoming the Swiss Army knife is a term that I like to use as a designer. expanding your range of tools is a great pursuit that you should always have. Like, so hearing Chris talk about code is like, as designers, it isn't something that we do, but we know the end product and what we want it to do or how we want it to look. And being equipped with the means to do it, I think that constant pursuit and hunger to diversify is something that you should always pursue.
Yeah, it's the perfect profession. I keep bringing up Lori today, but I remember I was working there for like a year, and you know, I ran into him at the elevator going down, and he's like, "Well, how are you liking it here?" And I said, "That's great. It's like amazing." And he's like, "Yes, it's pretty incredible. It's about everything." And he was saying landscape is about everything. And I was like,
Yes.
yeah. And I was like, wow. And he's like, and you just keep learning. I'm still learning. We're all still learning, and it was great. And
It sounds so
it just
basic, but
made
it's
me
really
so
true.
happy. Yeah. So, yeah.
Great. Yes, Lisa, for the question. Does
Thank you.
anyone else have any questions they want to ask?
Any other questions about the tech or
Well,
ethical questions or anything else?
Aishwarya and I were discussing this earlier on, how accessible smaller plugins, code development within programs has become with Claude Code and all of the tools that are now available to landscape designers to experiment and explore with. And we were really curious about what and how tool makers, maybe someone like you, or maybe even other tool makers, feel about or navigate this particular moment where maybe a bit of what you were earlier completely and totally in charge of and were responsible for as well is now sort of in everyone's hand a bit if they wanted to develop certain plugins,
Yeah.
develop certain tools. So how do you navigate this changing territory of authorship about putting tools or innovations in tools together?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's where being an experimenter, it comes in, and sort of always like looking for interesting things. I have experience that other people don't have. And it's important for me to bring that experience to the work that I'm doing, and knowledge about how something might get done, or a unique idea I've thought of before that I could never do, and suddenly the technology makes available. But yeah, I mean, I think that it is also terrifying to think, you know, people are talking about the death of apps and things like that. And as somebody who creates an app, I'm sort of like, you know, what's the truth in this? And I think there's truth in terms of AI replacing a lot of functionality, but in terms of bringing it all together in a meaningful way for a specific community, it's it's challenging, right? Like that there's a challenge to that, and it takes people to do the work, but I'm also adopting AI heavily, so I'm not sort of saying, well, I'm just going to try to keep up with AI, right?
Mm.
Because it's going fast. So as a technologist, I recognize the fact that the new technology is here and it's time to use it. Um,
I would
but
also add
trying to use
that,
it in the
like,
most creative,
yeah, that's
responsible way as possible.
that's what I was gonna say. As you know, yes, there are faster tools, but I think design in itself still requires authorship, and we are creating place, and that isn't something. I think that I as a designer, I hope that never gets lost. Like that, you still have to engage with communities. You have to be receptive, and yes, you could put that as an input, but that form making still has to be orchestrated is a beautiful term. And I think,
Yeah.
you still have to direct all this from above. So yeah, we're constantly like I shoot Chris. I'm like, oh, look, someone's doing this. And it's like one component of LandKit. And I always tell Chris, I'm like, you were the first one to develop it. And it's not like he's trying to monopolize the market and he
Hmm.
sees, that there's these little tools. Oh, let's incorporate that into LandKit. Let's do this. Let's do this. I think that what's amazing about LandKit is it's a tool that designers, it accelerates design. And so he's always in the position of like not trying to solve for one thing, but how do we promote iteration as the designer from the top? Like, how do we study all those things? And those are the examples that he shared. It's just like you can put an image in and say infill these blobs with plants, but then you, as the designer, you're the example of Olin. If you want to pull up that slide with the blobs, there was a direction in terms of soil moisture, different categories of different priorities that you as the designer have to still inform and add those values from a
It's not
database.
it's not a black box. It's funny because
Right.
AI was just beginning to peek its head out whenever we started this, and the logo is actually a black box unfolded. So it's the idea of this, like, it's not a black box. It's sort of this opened up thing that people can create a holistic setup for their project, right? And so they might be pushing topography that changes where water flows, which changes the soil moisture, which changes where the plants go, and everything can be connected in this holistic way. And you can set up patterning and sculpting and all these things together, which I get less into in this particular talk. But I think that holistic thinking and systems thinking is really the thing that landscape architects need to like really focus on as a skill as generalists and uh, not on curb details. I mean, curb details are important, but I think with all of the tools that are emerging, I think we're going to need people who can like just put all this stuff together and like build designs that shape our world in a way that is impactful in ways that it's never been before, you know. So,
Yeah, I think that's very helpful and very insightful. And I think just a quick follow-up question I had on that was, as someone who's been at the forefront of, technological advances, even whether you were in practice at OLIN or any of the other places, you were so much at the forefront of it that you actually branched off and developed the baby by yourself, right? Like it's like, okay, I'm so far ahead that I can actually make something out of it that adds value in and of independent of any practice, whether that's OLIN or any other practice, right?
right.
And
Yeah.
so with that perspective and with that, where you are in this whole scheme of things, what do you think, where do you think we're going to be in 10 years? Just as, off the top of your head, 10 years or 20 years, or whenever you think is a good time to take stock. Um, I'm just curious to hear what you think, what your thoughts are on that projection, just based on all the tremendous experience you have.
Yeah. It's funny. I saw something recently, I forget where I saw it, but somebody was saying how, you know, it's never been harder to predict the future than now. I mean, and not, I mean, that's probably almost been true for the last 100 years, but now it's really, really hard to predict the future. Um, I think that typically we underestimate what's going to happen, or we overestimate what's going to happen in the next year, and we underestimate what's going to happen in the next 10 years. So let's say that uh, all professional work is like pretty much redefined in 10 years. And let's say we have AI doing much more of this work, and the work that people are doing is much more curatorial, or I think eventually people are going to be focused on projects they want to be focused on because AI is going to be applied more as like a getting the things done that we have to get done. At least that's where I'd like to see things go. There's a great book that you can get for free on Amazon called Mana that maps two futures of AI. One is where we use AI to get extract the most out of people that we humanly can or inhumanly can. And then the other is how can we use AI to like make the best society possible, you know? And I think we should all just be focused on, you know, the one thing and watch out for the other and raise red flags when we see it. So
What was the name of the book again? Mana? Like M-A?
Manna. Yeah, Manna, I believe. Maybe it might be
Okay.
one N.
That's fine. I understand the word you are referring to, so it's a good.
Yeah.
That's all I have for the question.
That's amazing. Thank you for the time you took to just talk to the students through this toolmaker's perspective. And we thought it's important for students to just listen from the people behind, development of these tools, because as students, they are right now just starting to engage with all these like different user interfaces and ways tools speak to you and help you generate drawings. And I think this perspective really helps us think through how much goes into making the tool itself and how it's a process that's constantly evolving. I had one last question for you, which is a question that the students constantly keep asking us, and they also ask this of a lot of our lecturers specifically about the ethics of AI. As a technologist and as a generalist, how do you deal with the contradictions of AI itself as a technology? And, you hear about environmental concerns and all of that. And this is something that the students are increasingly wanting to hear from speakers and practitioners and technology.
Yeah. I think, it does have obvious environmental impacts. Like any other technology, with time, it's becoming more efficient, right? Like the things that our expectations are going crazy, right? Like if we're just using some machine learning stuff from 5 years ago, it's so efficient, like it's super duper efficient. But if we're talking about like training larger and larger and larger models, it gets crazier. At the same time, I would say that if we're going to use it for anything, this is what we should use it for, right? If we're not using it for this, what, right? So I think this is a great usage of AI, and I sort of feel like we get a free pass. We're allowed to use it. If you're making stupid memes, stop.
Yeah. Like, but I mean, think about the Industrial Revolution, and in that moment, how wasteful that moment was in the world, and this is potentially equipping anyone to do anything, which is crazy and wild, but really beautiful as well. Going back to what Chris said, it gives everyone a fair stake to like be a part of this conversation. This image, I don't have to know what purple plant is and what yellow plant is, but I can drive that direction to achieve that based on environmental considerations and tie it to a nursery and like all these things that would probably require 5 people, but I'm in the front seat of that, and I think it's crazy and overwhelming but really powerful as well. So I just want to my last statement is, I think it's a great course to be teaching as well, Aishwarya. I think equipping students with the tools to understand how to draw a plan in a section is great. We all need that foundational skills, but having this exposure to beyond, I think, is a great course to be introduced in academia. So congratulations to both of you for scripting this syllabus together.
Yeah, thank you so much for answering that. And I think you seem to be falling in a similar camp to a lot of our other speakers as well who have been insisting that the more we speak up about what we want to use AI for and the more space we take in that sphere, the more say you will eventually have to what direction it takes. So thank you so much for answering that complex question. We have another student who wants to ask you something if you have a moment to answer that.
Hi, how are you?
Hi. Good.
Hey, so first off, thank you so much for coming and talking to our class. We really, really appreciate it. It's great to hear a bunch of different sides of kind of this like spherical coin, I guess, with lots of different tangible ways to use AI and the different ways and the different sides of people on it. I think the rate that it's progressing and like how you said, you know, it's like it's impossible to see where this kind of like what it'll be like in 10 years or what it'll be like. It's getting harder to predict the future. And now I realize I'm kind of asking you to predict the future for me, but I think with the field being as it is, being as like advanced as it is, and advancing at the rate that it does, do you feel that it's to remain competitive and say like if somebody wanted to build their own firm one day, and maybe they need to answer a lot of questions, or make a lot of or like produce a lot of solutions to problems at a rapid pace, effectively, efficiently, and sustainably, do you think AI is imperative to basically stay competitive, to remain competitive in the field, to remain competitive as a firm, and to balance kind of this need and budget, I guess, to remain competitive?
That's a little hard to say, but what you find is that the more boutique firms can approach design how they want to. And it's not always efficient. It's not always the most technologically advanced. If they have the best work, that's what matters. But when you're talking about the longer tail of professional applications, that market becomes locally competitive. And if you're up against somebody who can like deliver it for way cheaper and just as good, then it becomes challenging. And I would say I think it's using the tools to have a balance of being more efficient, but also improving quality, right? So that's where I would always be looking at those two factors, and also that it's still the technology still allows you to be creative, right? And still allows you to that it's not being prescriptive of your work. And I think that's especially important with AI because AI is like trained on like the norm, right? Like it's trained on what everybody thinks or most people things should be. But I think landscape architects are in a incredible position as generalists moving into this future. Because if you have a specialty job that AI suddenly takes over, you're you're screwed, right? But if you're a generalist, just the way that you work with staff and consultants and architects, and you're kind of this hub, and you bring AI into that, it's you're in a great position to keep being the one that makes all these connections, I think. So I think in a way, landscape could be more resilient because of that to these changes. But I think landscape architects need to continue to work on what that looks like.
I will also add that, Chris worked at OLIN for, I think it was 11 years. And so he, he captured that aura and that process, and it's like milking the cow from the same source, right? And I've worked at MBVA, Scape, SWA, local, different approaches, and my critique of the profession is that there's a faster way to do things, and that's why I gravitated to LandKit. It's just like I know how to do these things, and I think that the criticism of these firms is that they're doing it the same way. Someone is drawing a hand sketch of contours, and then someone else is laying out the plans. And then the principal comes or the community comes and changes the path alignment, and everyone goes in, spins that circle, and in the same loop. And I think that being equipped to be competitive, which is the word that you use, understanding what tools are out there to go against that norm is great and really powerful, because we come up, we're selling this product, and we come across these firms, the star architect firms, that aren't receptive to change. And I think as students, being first knowing what's out there and being able to use those tools, or even having the exposure to those tools and knowing that it can be done in other ways, makes you really powerful going into this future. Because if you just go to a firm and you milk the cow and learn the same process, you just repeat that, and then you start your own firm and you do the same thing the same way, when there's the world is this big and there's 50 ways of doing things. And so I think that exposure is really great as a designer, instead of just doing the same thing the same way Scape does it, because that's what we look at, and that's what ends up on Landscape Architecture magazine or whatever.
Yeah. Yeah, I wish I had more experience at a few other firms. But I think it's, getting exposure with just firms in general is so important. Like Ishana's saying, being able to say, how don't I want to do things?
Yeah,
As well
yeah.
as, how,
And that's the
like,
premise for starting Landau, is to help accelerate the impact for all designers. You were doing that just for OLIN, and I think that is really
yeah.
beautiful in a way.
Yeah. Yeah, it was a new iteration of that thinking for sure.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I think the consensus across the poll is that like innovation through experience with discovery of all of these things is exactly how you stay on like the cutting edge, I guess we could say, like to remain competitive. I guess I mean I assume it's like true in every field, but I think for ours, since it is not new, but like relatively undersaturated and um always advancing and always changing with, and so like societal based and like human experience based, I think like just this mindset of allowing change and adaptation is really, really important and crucial to being relevant. But yeah, thank you guys so much. I really appreciate your answer and your lecture. Thank you guys so much.
Thank you.
Great. Thank you so much, Chris and Nishan. I know we're running over time, and we really appreciate you staying to answer all curious questions that we all had.
That's all right.
We look forward to being in touch with you. I know we have our engagements with LandKit every once in a while, and as our teaching assignments keep changing, I don't know how consistent that will be, but then we really appreciate any engagement that we keep having with all of you at the LandKit team. We've been in, I think Ben Sami had a workshop with us last year, and then we used LandKit again fairly recently, last semester. So it's a wonderful initiative, and there's a lot to experiment with for sure.
Yeah, absolutely.
Great.
Great.
Much.
Thank you. Thanks for having us.
Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Have a great day.
You too. Thank you.
Ciao.
Oh, send us the recording.
Yes.
Nice.
Yes.
Yeah.
Thank you.